I'm an optimist by nature, and sometimes working in politics doesn't make that easy. It seems like every day there's news stories about how our representative democracy is failing voters. There's extreme polarization, legislative gridlock, and no incentive at all for our elected officials to come together to solve the problems that face us. But here in Virginia, voters are already standing up and affecting change by focusing on foundational, nonpartisan solutions that can improve our democracy. In the last few years alone, Virginia has expanded access to absentee ballots, instituted automatic voter registration, and has established what experts agree are some of the fairest legislative maps in America. Now it's time to build on that momentum and set the stage for years to come. That's why I'm excited to announce the launch of Upvote Virginia, a nonpartisan organization dedicating to elevating the voices of Virginia voters through education, advocacy, and grassroots mobilization. My name is Liz White, and I'm honored to be Upvote Virginia's founding executive director. Our organization will focus on issues that aim to modernize our electoral system while also making our government more transparent and accessible. As we launch, we're excited to tell you about our first flagship issue, ranked choice voting. RCV is a proven, practical reform designed to reward candidates who build consensus. It already has bipartisan support in Virginia, and we're excited to ramp up our education and advocacy efforts in the coming months. I've been talking to Virginia voters for a long time, and I know there are so many people out there who care about the health of our democracy and who want to make a good faith effort to make our elections stronger and more equitable. If you want to get involved, if you're an optimist too, visit upvoteva.org to learn more. Let's get to work.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Liz White, and I'm the founding executive director of a brand new democracy reform organization called Upvote Virginia. The video you just watched is something we put together to introduce ourselves to the public, to talk about why the work we do is important, to get folks excited to join us. But I also want to talk more in depth today about what we hope to accomplish as Upvote Virginia. In internet lingo, to upvote something means you lend your support to it in order to promote it to the top of a discussion thread. The more people upvote, the more prominent the comment or post becomes. It's a way to make sure important topics don't get lost in the noise, but are instead brought front and center. The most crucial and impactful changes to our democracy are often not the ones being talked about the most. We know how to bring complex ideas to the forefront of voters' minds, and we will continue to upvote those issues and effect fundamental change in our new form. We want to build on the successes and strengths of our predecessor organization, One Virginia 2021. In this new iteration, we'll focus on a broader array of necessary democracy reforms. This includes a push for a more transparent and ethical government, increasing civic engagement even beyond voter participation, and a continued focus on fully independent redistricting, and our first flagship issue, ranked choice voting. This is a new organization with new leadership and a new mission. Our mission statement is as follows. Upvote Virginia is dedicated to ensuring that Virginia leads the way in improving the structure of our electoral system to better reflect the will of the voters, thus providing for a more representative, inclusive, open, and transparent government. We plan to continue our successful strategy of combining a robust voter education program with advocacy and grassroots organization. Upvote Virginia exists to elevate Virginia voters, and we're so excited that you joined us today for our official kickoff. We have several exciting guest speakers today. In the spirit of bipartisanship, our first two speakers are Governor George Allen and Congressman Beyer. First up is Governor Allen. George Allen has served Virginia as a delegate, a governor, a congressman, and a senator. A self-described common sense Jeffersonian conservative, He has been a longtime supporter of practical and fundamental reforms that make democracy work more effectively and efficiently. Governor Allen was instrumental in the statewide education efforts around redistricting reform, and we're so grateful for his continued support of our work.
First of all, I want to thank Upvote Virginia for inviting me to say a few words at their big launch. And I'm glad to be joining all of y'all today, especially because Upvote Virginia's main focus is an issue that I've been advocating for, and that is ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is an issue that's really gaining ground and momentum and support all across the country. And I think it's something that Virginia localities ought to seriously consider for their county and city elections. Now, the principle of ranked choice voting is really foundational to our country, and that is that the people are the owners of the government. They ought to be the majority of the people ought to be electing their representatives. And ranked choice voting makes it so that elected officials are truly representative of the will of the majority of the voters. And we know in some cases, and in fact, many elections, there's more than two candidates in an election. Sometimes there's 3, 4, 5, 6, even more people running for election. You'd like to get to a majority. Now, some states, the way they get to a majority vote, in some states, that if no candidate gets over 50%, they go to a runoff, which is costly, but they go for a runoff weeks later. And that's one approach to get to a majority. The other approach is using ranked choice voting to get to a majority. And you say, what does a majority matter? Well, in our representative democracy from the beginning, Thomas Jefferson in the 1780s was writing William Carmichael and George Washington about the importance of a majority vote, because as we know, the just powers of the government are derived from the consent of the people, of the governed. So the real experiences, though, with real ranked choice voting are fairly clear. And some people need to know that how they've been working, but it's new in that it wasn't around 20 years ago. But for example, military and overseas ballots in some states have been using ranked choice voting for a long time. Other states for several years now, from Maine, Michigan, Colorado, Utah, and Alaska, are using ranked choice voting for their elections in those states and localities. Here in Virginia, last year, and I advocated for this amongst the Republicans in nominating our candidates for Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor to use ranked choice voting for this kind of disassembled convention that we had to use because of all the lockdowns in Virginia, that you're not going to have people sitting in a car going ballot after ballot in a convention. It's just not going to work. So we, out of necessity, maybe used ranked choice voting, but there were thousands and thousands of people participating in it. And there were a slew of candidates running for each of those offices. And by the end of it, none of them got over 50% on the first ballot. But ultimately, we nominated our candidates for Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. It brought unity. There was respect for the process, that they did get a majority of the votes. And so it worked well, although you did have to explain to people how ranked choice voting works, just like with any new approach. Now, even just a few weeks ago, certain congressional districts in Virginia, the Republicans, nominated their candidates for Congress by using ranked choice voting. Now, I'm talking about Republicans. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's bipartisan. In 2020, the Virginia General Assembly passed a law that allowed localities the option of using ranked choice voting for their local elections. It was supported by the most conservative Republicans, moderates, and the most liberal Democrats. This is not, ranked choice voting is not something that benefits either party. What it benefits are the people, the voters, that their will is better reflected. Now, this bill, this law now gives localities, counties and cities, the option to use ranked choice voting if they so desire. I would not be a part of any measure or proposal that would impose ranked choice voting on any political party or any county or city. That should be the decisions of those parties or those counties and cities with it. I'm glad that what Upvote Virginia is going to do is going to be working on this issue in the coming months. They'll be sharing information, they'll be helping, there'll be a tremendous resource for supporters of ranked choice voting, working with the men and women in the counties and cities, local governing bodies that will make a decision whether to pilot this idea for their county or city or not. And that's the way it ought to be. So with that, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this launch. I look forward to seeing you all on the trail ahead. And most of all, I wish you all the best wishes, because I like working with many of you, as I have in recent years, on redistricting reform and now this ranked choice voting, because I think all of us want to make sure that we have a more perfect Commonwealth. See you on the trail ahead. Adios.
Thank you, Governor Allen. Next up, we'll hear from Don Beyer. Congressman Beyer has served Virginia and the US in a variety of roles, including everything from lieutenant governor to ambassador to Switzerland. He currently represents Virginia's 8th congressional district. Congressman Beyer was also very helpful in getting Virginia's redistricting referendum passed, and he is a leading patron of the Fair Representation Act in Congress. As you'll see, he's a passionate advocate for democracy reform and transparency, and we're thankful to him for being here today.
I'd like to thank Upvote Virginia for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm really excited for this organization to be launching a new chapter. And I'd like to thank Governor and Senator George Allen for saying a few words as well. George and I aren't always at the same events. I enjoyed being his lieutenant governor in the mid-90s, and he was always very kind to me, even when I was trying to be the loyal opposition. But thanks, George, for being part of this bipartisan efforts to show how ranked choice voting brings people together no matter their political leanings. This is an issue that really puts the will of the voters front and center. I've been a supporter of democracy reform for a long time, from co-sponsoring the Fair Representation Act, which would be ranked choice voting for congressional primaries and general elections, and working on projects on multi-member districts, and really very proud to support Amendment 1 in Virginia in 2020. There weren't a lot of us who thought we should give up the power when we had it, but this is something I care very deeply about. And I'm really happy that Virginia probably has the least gerrymandered congressional districts in the country right now. We know how tenuous and fragile American democracy can be. We're looking at what's happening in Wisconsin right now, Georgia. We've seen, sadly, a former president and his allies try to overturn a free and fair election. And we're still working through the fallout, but this didn't happen by accident. When we have single member districts with plurality voting, not ranked choice voting, we get this extreme polarization. We get a lack of trust in our institutions as low as we've ever seen, because so many representatives don't have to worry about the political ramifications of what happens back home. They're, and this is on the right and the left, appealing to a very small, intense, extreme base and not reflecting the will of most Americans. Well, ranked choice voting is one thing that we can do to mitigate all of these issues. We've seen it work in states and localities all across America. When voters are able to rank their choices, instead of picking just one person, voters are given more options, the candidates are more diverse, slates are put together that have a lot more diversity, more women, more people of color. But the best part is that extreme voices tend to be drowned out by the people, the moderate, raging center. Here in Virginia, it's been great to see the lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, coming together to strengthen our democracy in recent years. We've expanded early voting. We've adopted our own statewide Voting Rights Act. I just had a primary. 8 years ago, there were 10 of us on the ballot, a lot of really good candidates, state legislators, mayors, heads of urban league, things like that. Only 38,000 people showed up. This year, with only 2 of us, but because of the reforms made in the Virginia Assembly, 56,000 showed up, more than 50% more, just because of those reforms. And we've implemented same-day voter registration. The list goes on and on. So I think it makes sense to build on this momentum by enhancing the way our elected officials are chosen in the first place. And that means having localities take advantage of HB 1103, which allows cities and counties across Virginia to adopt an RCV, a ranked choice voting pilot program. I know that when voters see how this process works, by the way, everywhere it's been implemented, voters find it easy to understand, they really like it, and they become more engaged, and democracy will be strengthened as well. What we've seen every place ranked choice voting is implemented, turnout goes up. And if you believe that democracy is about the will of the people, it works. So with that, I just want to thank Upvote for having me here today. I'm so appreciative of your work on this issue and encourage anyone that wants to see stronger democratic systems to lend a hand in their efforts. Thanks so much, and good luck, and thanks to Governor Senator George Allen for being with us.
Thank you, Congressman. Next, I've invited two leading experts on democracy reform to talk with us today about some of the issues we'll be focusing on. Danielle Allen is a professor at Harvard University and the director of Harvard's Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics. She's an incredibly accomplished writer, academic, advocate, and the first Black woman ever to run for statewide office in Massachusetts. Kathy Fung is the National Redistricting Director for Common Cause and has led their work to challenge partisan gerrymandering across the country. She's been an activist and a civil rights attorney for more than 20 years, and she's the architect of California's Citizen Redistricting Commission. Thank you both so much for being with us today. We're so excited to have you as part of this launch event. Danielle, I would love to start with you. It seems like last decade, most of the energy in the democracy reform space, I know in Virginia and across the country, was focused on redistricting reform. And now it seems like a lot of people have pivoted to focus on ranked choice voting as the next big thing. Can you talk about why you think that is?
Sure. No, thanks so much, Liz. I appreciate this important work that you're doing in Virginia. It's really exciting. We're in a big moment for our democracy, really a constitutional moment. I think a lot of us recognize that the problems are pretty deep. We're stuck in terms of a legislature nationally that seems often not to function, and lots of state governments too that are really polarized and therefore paralyzed as well. That has led everybody, I think, to take a bigger view about what we need. And at the end of the day, to have healthy representation in the 21st century, we need voice and choice for all. A lot of people have felt locked out of voice and choice, and ranked choice voting is the answer to that problem in particular. So independent redistricting commissions are part of the answer, but then there's a further need to make sure people get that chance to fully express voice and choice, and that's what ranked choice voting brings.
Can you talk about voice and choice more specifically? What are the benefits of a ranked choice voting election?
Sure, absolutely. So as you know, when you have a ranked choice voting election, you get to rank all of your preferences, your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. So in the very beginning, you just get a fuller expression of your point of view is sort of poured into the election. And then, of course, if nobody gets over that 50% threshold, the person at the bottom drops out and their votes sort of roll over to that voter's second choice person. And so at the end of the day, nobody wins until you have 50% of the vote as well. So you have a really sturdy majority there. But so what happens is people get a fuller expression of their views. The fact that it's possible to win not just a first choice vote, but also a second choice or a third choice preference means that more candidates are willing to throw their hat into the ring as well. There's sort of more opportunity to run. You get more non-traditional candidates in the mix. And in municipal elections in particular, especially as we've seen in the Bay Area and in Minneapolis, we actually see more diverse representation in the end as well. So the people who are elected with ranked choice voting do a better job of representing the breadth of our population. So voice in the sense of being able to contribute to the process with your full opinion, also more range of candidates and more diverse results in the elections. And then, of course, that sort of critical fact that, when you've got more candidates running, we've all got more choices.
Excellent. And I know ranked choice voting is really seeing a lot of use in Maine and Utah and California and Minnesota and Colorado. And I think Virginia could really be poised to be one of the next big users of ranked choice voting. How do you think Virginia voters will benefit from widespread use of ranked choice voting?
Well, I just think it's, first of all, I want to say really exciting that Virginia is taking a leadership role here. And I speak to you today from Massachusetts. We also are working on municipal ranked choice voting. And there's this great historical resonance there. If you look back to the American Revolution, it was Virginia and Massachusetts linking arms that really led the way for the revolution. And so I believe we have a chance to do that here now, and we should really hook up our municipal RCV efforts across our two states, so then we can be an engine of change for the country as a whole. So for all Virginia voters, without any question, voice and choice for all. I mean, this is really more choice for everybody, more expression of voice for everybody. It's also a way to have fair fights. The evidence suggests that when candidates are running to be people's, not just their first choice, but also their second choice and their third choice, they actually campaign in more positive ways. We begin to take negative campaigning out of the whole system. So fair fights is another thing that we get from ranked choice voting. I think, honestly, we all want that across the board. I think we're all tired of the negativity and the divisiveness. So voice and choice for all, fair fights, that's what's good for all Virginians.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kathy,
Yeah.
you probably know more about redistricting reform and where each state is in their journey toward fair maps than just about anybody.
Sure.
Can you talk about how what the national landscape is after this redistricting session and how Virginia fits into that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Virginia has one of the harder methods of amending your constitution in order to achieve some of these reforms. Some states have an initiative process where people can gather signatures and place something on the ballot directly for voters to pass a law or amend the Constitution. Other states have something where they might need to go through the legislature for a check-in. But what Virginia has is that you all have to go through a vote 2 times in 2 separate sessions with your legislature adopting something before it can be put onto the ballot for voters to ratify. And so the big challenge is that any redistricting reform or any reform that changes the way elections are run and shifts power will have to go through people who got to power through that process, right? And it's very hard, I think, for people who are incumbents, even when they are very well-meaning, to say, ooh, I'm going to change the very thing, the very rules that helped me to win. And so in Virginia, when the initiative when your reforms were ultimately adopted, 2 votes through the legislature, 1 vote on the ballot, that reform really represented a whole lot of long discussions, a whole lot of compromise, particularly because midway through, the legislative power switched from one party to another. So you really had to make sure that everybody was happy with it. One of the things that Virginia did as part of that compromise to get ultimately to the reforms that they had was to create a commission that had 8 people who were appointed directly by the legislature, who were legislators themselves, right? And 8 people who were citizens, but who were still appointed by the legislature. And so that gave quite a bit of, it injected a kind of partisanship that had already been infused through legislative politics. Your challenge then is that it meant that every step of the way, while Virginia voters may have hoped for this fresh conversation, right, as Danielle calls it, new voices, new choices, right, what you ended up with was a lot of people falling into their usual partisan slots, their ruts. And so the commission itself had a lot of hearings. You had record number of people participating for the first time, record number of people throwing their names into the hat to try to be a commissioner, one of the citizen commissioners. But at the same time, once it came down to it, the commissioners themselves, they were part of a party mechanism that had always existed. And so they were not able to come to a conclusion where they had enough votes to pass the map. So it all got kicked over to the courts. How does that compare to other states? Many other states have a much more independent process where the legislature has a limited role in picking. Maybe they have a role in striking the way courts lawyers might strike each other's jury members who they think would be biased against them, right? But in Virginia, because you had direct picks from your state legislature, you had a lot of politics enter into that commission process, and that was really hard to get through. The thing that is very similar about Virginia is that ultimately, when it's all said and done, the maps are reviewed by your courts. And the Virginia courts, like many courts around the country, Ohio was involved in really partisan back and forth, right? But the courts looked at the maps and they were able to look at it with a fair and impartial lens and say, there's a problem with these maps, right? In Virginia, they said, well, there's no map, so we're tasked with it. But they were willing to kind of come at it from the perspective of bringing both sides in and figuring out what those fair maps would be. So ultimately, the maps that were adopted by the Virginia courts were good maps. I think by and large, people said, you know, it's not perfect for everybody. Lots of incumbents found themselves double bunked with somebody else. But at the same time, for Virginians, this was a fresh start. So in that sense, then Virginia came out on top, right? You have a new opportunity to have choices on the ballot that you may never have seen. You may have some longtime incumbents who are working much harder to earn Virginian votes. And last but not least, you have an opportunity to have Virginians really shape the conversation and to put new issues and ideas on the table. And when you have new people who are running, particularly, they're thinking about what new part of the electorate can I talk to, because I can't just rely on the same group that elected the last set of incumbents. And so that will hopefully lead to an expansion of the electorate as well.
Excellent. And you touched on the transparency, the public participation parts of the process, which I think were some of the most important aspects of the new legislation, the new constitutional amendment that got implemented. Can you talk about why that matters so much, to have what it was before compared to what it is now with the public involved?
Yes. I like to think of this as a little bit like all of those cooking shows that we now have on television. It used to be that if you went to a really fancy restaurant, you know, everything was done in the kitchen and out of sight. And, you know, here comes this plate of food, and like it or not, this is the plate of food that you get. And now we have whole channels that are dedicated to looking at how cooking happens, right? Talking to chefs or up and coming chefs or people who are just creatively coming up with their own solutions, right? And what has happened is that it has demystified the process of cooking. It's sort of allowed a lot of us to say, oh, I'm going to buy that new vegetable. I'm going to try this new cooking method, right? I'm going to try somebody else's cuisine because I never thought about eating, you know, from Morocco, but now I just watch this chef go to this place, watch the chef cook it up. And that sounds really interesting. And I think the way that redistricting has always been, maybe it's a little bit more devious than that, right? Is that it was in the back kitchen, right? It was always intentionally obscured from the public. It was always hidden, right? So that partisan operatives could make the deals that they needed to and draw the lines that would favor their party in power. And the dish that you got served up, like it or not, was what it was. And you didn't know how it was made, and you didn't know, you know, any other choices. And the public's participation in the Virginia process is like this whole new world where you are introduced to new cuisines, new flavors, new spices, new options for me to try myself, right? And it has demystified the process. It has said that the democracy ultimately belongs to us. I can talk about my community because who's more expert than me to talk about where I live? I can share that information. And not only that, in some instances, if I put my homework in, I might even be able to draw a better district or a better set of districts than the people who are longtime operatives, because I'm actually listening to what other people are putting out there. And that is part of the process of also, I think, healing what we now see in terms of a national divisiveness, right? The polarization that Danielle talked about. If we create spaces where regular people can come together across partisan lines and figure out how to allocate power, and that's fundamentally what redistricting is, right? In a way that lets everybody sit at the table, I think that you begin to say, this democracy isn't a winner takes all fight where if you lose, I'm going to burn your village down. What this democracy is we all have to sit at the Thanksgiving table together, right? And eat that, share that meal together. And we're each going to bring a little bit of potluck from our own experience and our own cultures, so that we can share that meal together. I think that that's ultimately what this experiment of creating a more participatory redistricting process is about.
Excellent. And my hope throughout, as I watched the commission work and as I watched all of these people come out of the woodwork and speak up for their communities and give input on the maps, I was watching them, stretch and strengthen their civic participation muscles.
Yes.
And my hope is that not only do they come back in 10 years and do it again on redistricting, but that they do it on lots of issues that impact their lives in between. It all comes back to more voice.
Right.
And I think especially in Virginia, we are a diverse state. We are racially diverse, ethnically diverse, politically diverse, pretty purple, geographically diverse, the beach to the mountains and everything in between. I would love to just hear quick thoughts from each of you on the importance of these democracy reforms and their impact on creating opportunities for all Virginians to be heard and to participate.
Thanks so much, Liz. That's such an important point about the incredible beauty of our diversity along all dimensions, from ethnic and demographic to geographic to ideological. We are an incredible and beautiful and diverse place. We are, of course, here in the 21st century, really struggling to, in meaningful ways, reinvent ourselves, right? Because of all of that change. And at the end of the day, I said we need voice and choice for all. We do. I said we need fair fights. We do. We also need responsive representation. I think that's a really important idea to focus on. Responsive representation, where it's responsive for everybody. And that means representation has to be both inclusive. It really has to bring all of that breadth of change and sort of difference of opinion into view. And though we also need effective representation, our representatives have to get things done. So when we can bring everybody into the process with ranked choice voting, that gets us that inclusion. And then the fact that we require folks to get past that 50% threshold before they hold office gives them the legitimacy they need to be effective. So that's where you get inclusion and effectiveness together. That's responsive representation. That's what ranked choice voting gives you.
Thank you.
Liz, I would say that how we conduct our elections, the means by which we get to the final ends, the representatives, really matters, because how we conduct our elections shapes the campaign behavior, which shapes the kind of people who ultimately assume office. And I think that between redistricting reform and other reforms like ranked choice voting, what they do is they change the nature of the campaigning, so that it ultimately changes the nature of how representative and how responsive people are and what kind of people ultimately get in, right? If your redistricting is done in a way that is hyper-partisan, and let's say it's hyper-packed certain voters into a district, so it's a shoe-in for the incumbent then never has to work very hard to try to win. They're not really going out and talking to constituents to hear about those day-to-day problems that people need help in representation for. And they're not particularly worried about earning voters' votes, but instead on raising a lot of money to be able to buy access to that committee, or in other ways gain power within a party structure. With ranked choice voting, as they're campaigning, they're interested just as much in appealing to the voters and finding potentially alliances with other coalitions, and not just speaking to a very small base, right? A lot of times in elections, we find that candidates have an incentive, or maybe their campaign managers incentivize them to only talk to their super base people, right? And then try to suppress the vote of other people who won't vote for them, right? Because it is a winner takes all system. But if you change the rules of those elections and you say, actually, you all win when you increase the number of people that you're trying to get out to vote, because maybe those people will give you their number one. And if not their number one, maybe they'll give you their number 2 or number 3 votes. That is a plus for everyone. And when you are campaigning in a way where you're listening and trying hard to earn every voter's vote and not just dismissing certain people as, well, they're not part of my base, then when you go to that body that you are representing somebody in, whether it's Congress or your House of Delegates or your Senate, right? Those people will be behaving in ways where they're much more likely to reach out to colleagues and figure out practical solutions and not just play party politics. Like, I'm going to do this thing in order to wear on my sleeve what my partisan position is, or to bash the other person because it gets a few points from people who are party loyalists.
You want to reward conversation and nuance.
And I think that's what most Virginians and most Americans want, right? They want people who are going to office to represent us as a whole. And even though I might have some issues and beliefs that I feel really strongly on, I also don't want you to behave in a way where all you're trying to do is to play some kind of partisan game where nobody wins because no priorities get addressed whatsoever.
I want to thank both of you so much for your time. I know that we're coming up short on time, but I am so excited to join this national coalition of people like both of you and your organizations doing such good work in these spaces. I'm an optimist. I'm very hopeful that our democracy's health can be increased, and talking to both of you makes me feel even more so. So thank you both so much for doing this and being part of our event.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for your leadership, Liz. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone watching this today. We hope to see you in the coming weeks and months. As part of our kickoff, we'll be traveling around the state to do some events and to continue the conversation. In the meantime, we encourage you to check out our brand new website, upvoteva.org, for more information about our new organization, our new slate of issues, and how you can support our work. This is the beginning of a new conversation, and we're so excited to have you be a part of it. We want to hear your ideas, know what issues you care about, and what you hope to accomplish in the future for Virginia. We look forward to hearing from you. See you on the road.